Number 1. The house. I had a very difficult upbringing, and things really never got better with my parents. I grew up feeling like they resented me. I mean, compared to my older brother, I guess I was just a disappointment to them. He was one of those all-around perfect kinds, you know. He was an athlete, he was good at class, and he was basically pretty popular. I had no interest in sports or being popular. I was actually better at him when it came to grades. That didn't seem to be the most important thing to my parents. My older brother was still the golden boy because he was just perfect all around. Being 2 years older than me, my brother was out of the house when I was 16. He went off to college. They left me at home with my parents, and that wasn't pleasant. Things just got worse, and they kept comparing me to him over and over again. And nothing I did was ever good enough, and my parents began trying to force me to get a job. Keep in mind that they had never done this with my brother. It wasn't really anything to do with money, though. It was quite obvious that my parents were just constantly trying to get me out of the house, so they didn't have to deal with me at all. It didn't take too long before I just couldn't take it anymore. There were no positives living at home anymore, so I decided to leave. I didn't even tell them I was going, and honestly, I wondered whether or not they would even notice. I just left. For a while, I was staying at the houses of some of my friends. However, that couldn't last very long in any way. I was 16 years old, and technically it wasn't legal for me to be staying in their houses. So after bumping back and forth from friend's room to friend's room, I soon found myself staying with a guy who used to be buddies with my brother. He didn't go to college, and he was just sort of a slacker. So I stayed with him for a month or so. However, he eventually got thrown out of his apartment, and after that, I had my first real experience living out on the streets. I went to the city because of homeless shelters. Hell, I remember my first time ever in a homeless shelter. It was the scariest experience I'd ever had in my life. Hell, I even remember crying. But as terrible as it was, at no point did I ever consider going back to live with my parents. It was bad where I was, but it would have been much worse in my view to go back. Homeless shelters were pretty okay. The only thing that was difficult about them were how strict their rules were. They had very specific times that you could be there, and also hard set times when they would no longer let anyone in. This occasionally caused issues with me because I would be out trying to get money so I could get some food. And more than a few times, I ended up not getting back to the shelter in time. I did end up finding the place, though. It was an abandoned house that many people squatted in. It definitely was not as good as the shelters, but it was definitely also something that was good when I had nowhere else to go. I'd slept in train stations and alleys at times, so it being in an actual building was good. However, there was drug use there, and I really wasn't interested in that. I was more concerned with getting sleep when I was there. Anyway, I had a really terrifying experience in the house one night. I missed the deadline to get into the shelter. It was really cold that evening too, so I had no real choice but to go to the house. It was going to be more crowded because of the cold, but I was fortunate to find a corner that I could sleep in. I'd been carrying a pillow and a blanket in my backpack for a while, so I was able to go right to sleep. It was still dark when something woke me up. I wasn't really sure what it was, but when my eyes adjusted, I saw a very scary-looking man standing over me. He was angry-looking, and his eyes bored holes right through me. "Why have you been doing it?" he asked me, in a voice that was literally dripping with hatred. "What?" I began to ask, having no idea what he was talking about. "You are going to die," he cut me off. "But before you do, you're going to tell me why have you been doing it." "Why?" Being told I was going to die by a scary man in the middle of the night in a squatting house just floored me. I was so terrified that I wasn't even able to respond. I was trying to make sense of what was happening. I wasn't even able to wonder what it was he was talking about. I was just too scared of him in general. "You're gonna tell me why before I killed you," he suddenly said, much louder than he had spoken before. And then he also grabbed onto my shoulders and began to shake me, screaming, "You're going to die!" Well, the commotion obviously caught the attention of other people in the room and the house with me. A few other guys came over and pulled the guy off of me. He kept struggling with them and told them that they were going to die too. However, they were able to easily overpower the guy, and they threw him out of the house. He stood outside, screaming at the house, and that was bad. If someone were to call the police, everyone could have been arrested. I left the house the back way during the commotion. I had enough change that I was able to get on the subway and just rode that back and forth for a while. After that, I could never go back to that house. I was way too terrified to even consider it. You might like to think that I went home after all of this. I didn't. Although the experience was terrifying, I just couldn't bring myself to go back to my parents' house. This actually happened 15 years ago, and I'm still estranged from them. I get along great with my older brother, who helped me get a GED and convinced me to eventually go to college. So I'm in a good place with a good job now. So that much is good. But it's weird. I will never know what that man was talking about. I will never know what he thought that I did, or even if he really thought I did anything. He seemed like he was in a lot of pain, and was angry over something. All I know is that it definitely was not something that I did to him, and I will never know what it is. Number 2. Room. I guess before I explain what happened to me, I should explain why it is that I ran away from home as a teenager. It had a lot to do with the man that my mom decided to marry after her and my dad got divorced. My dad was no prize himself. He was a bit of an asshole and even bordered on being abusive. He would spank to cause pain when I was much younger and would not stop until his kids were absolutely bawling. My stepfather never hit us, but he was still awful in other ways. He yelled at us for no reason. He would get up in the middle of the night on school nights and play music really loud that woke us up. We would feel terrible at school, and our mom just chose him over us again and again. I decided that I had to leave, but I didn't do it by just getting up and leaving during the night. I actually had a plan. I got a part-time job and saved up some money. So then, the plan was that once I had the money where I could go and find a place to stay, and then hopefully get a job, I would leave. That way, I wouldn't have to sleep on the streets, like a lot of runaways end up doing. After several months, I bought myself a bus ticket and headed to LA. Yeah, I guess it is kinda cliche. But I thought that it was a good place for me to try to get away to. Once I was there, I was able to get a really cheap room in an old building for a really cheap price. I was able to lie about my age and get myself a little job. All in all, it seemed to me that I made the right decision, that I did a good job in getting myself prepared for it too. Things worked out pretty well for a while, but the building I lived in was not really a safe and quiet place. I had to begin sleeping with earplugs. That was the best way for me to get rest, and the plugs blocked out the noise. But one night, while I was sleeping, a series of gunshots woke me up. That had been something I hadn't heard before, and it completely brought me out of sleep and put me immediately on edge. It sounded like it came from the hallway. I was too poor at the time to have a phone, so I couldn't call 911. I didn't know what to do, really. My door was closed and locked, of course, including a bolt lock. But I was still extremely worried. I just decided to not indicate that I had been woken up. I did not turn on any lights and I did not move. A few moments later, there was a thumping on my door. It wasn't someone knocking on it, but it seemed simply like someone was trying to open it. And although that was terrifying, it didn't last very long. I did my best to just not make a sound. I didn't move again until I heard the police sirens. Well, I didn't move after that either. It wasn't until the police actually knocked on the door that I moved. And I moved and opened the door. And although it was just a moment, I did see a person lying in their blood in the hallway. The police came in the room to talk to me, so I didn't see much. It was the murder of a resident of one of the other apartments, but we didn't know by who or why. I had to move out of that place. I actually found a motel that was cheap enough and rented me a room at a monthly rate, but I couldn't remain in that building after that experience. So as things went on, I eventually went back to school. I made a life for myself in LA, went to college and got a good job. I did make up with my family, although I never moved back in with them. We get along today quite well. Number 3. Tent. You know, it seems like in a lot of runaway stories, very similar situations play out. Now, I'm not criticizing that, so I need to explain what I mean. When teenagers run away, they spend time with friends or they go to the cities and are homeless there. And that makes perfect sense because those are obvious options for somebody who is running away from home. I ran away from home as a teenager. My experience was a whole lot different, however. I'd been camping a whole lot in my life, and I had my own camping gear. I was a good fisher, and knew that if I left and went through some rural areas, forests and such, I would be able to survive pretty easily. So my running away from home was sort of like a very long camping trip. I won't go too much into the reasons why I left. It was just strong problems with my parents. They were trying to force me into things that I wasn't interested in doing. And after putting up with that for so long, it just got to be too much. So one morning, after the two of them had gone to work, I packed up my camping gear and went on my way. I had picked the perfect way for myself to leave home. I was happy. I stayed out in the hills and in the woods. There was plenty of fish for me to catch, and the nights were clear and warm. I didn't come across any other hikers, and if I did, I could pass myself off easily as nothing but a hiker. My tent was put up close to a creek, so the water I needed was right there, as well as the fish. So it was pretty good. I'd been living out in the woods, camping for a couple of weeks, at the point in time that this story really takes place. I woke up one morning and came out of my tent. My attention was immediately drawn to a tree that was directly in my line of sight. I was shocked to see that someone had taken a fish and nailed it into the trunk of the tree. I was killing fish every day for food, but this was just weird and sickening. It also meant that someone had been in my campground while I was sleeping. That wasn't totally weird. This was a creek, and other campers might need to use it. But it was just odd that they were only there while I was sleeping. It did something so pointlessly cruel to an animal. There could be only one reason to do it, and that was to intimidate me, and that just wasn't a good thing. I didn't let it bother me for the moment, however. I took the fish down and went about my day. I walked around and tried to find any evidence of other people around me. I wasn't able to find any other campsites or something like that. I didn't find any people, and didn't really see anything that led me to believe there were other campers around. Now, by the time I had gone back to sleep, I had all but forgotten about what had happened. I chalked it up to nothing but a simple hiker who came by the camp while I was sleeping and decided to play a mean joke. So I wasn't really worried when I went to bed that night. Well, by the next morning, I realized I had to start taking it more seriously. There was yet again an animal nailed to the same tree when I woke up. However, this one was a dead rabbit. Now, the only thing I can say is that it is fortunate, and I did know for sure that the rabbit was not killed as it was nailed. That would have woken me up without a doubt. But this was obviously a statement, and I had to take it seriously. I took the rabbit down, and I buried it too. And then I packed up my things and went hiking far out of my way to find a different campsite. I went all day and got very far from the area I had been in previously. I found another nice creek before nightfall and made my camp. I slept well, thinking I had given the animal nailer what they wanted by leaving. And the following morning, I came out of my tent to see a squirrel nailed to a tree. I was shocked. I had hiked an entire day away from where this had been happening before. So I wasn't invading the same person's area. There was no way. And it also means that he had to follow me, some way, for an entire day without me knowing about it at all. If this was a message for me to get out of the area, I had to take it very seriously. If I didn't, I may end up getting nailed. So I hiked down to the road and walked along it, hitchhiking. I eventually got picked up and was taken a long ways away. I didn't go back home, in case you were wondering. I found a public campground a long way and stayed there for a while before moving on. I lived for several months camping and I was cool with it, but eventually I did want to get back to society. I found a job and worked my way up in the world. I now have a really great family and I could provide for them very well. If I hadn't left those woods, that may not have happened. So I took the hint. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope you're doing well and staying safe with everything that is happening. I almost didn't post this video because there is enough horror going on in the world right now, but the people who tell these stories happen to tell them to entertain you, even with all the horror going on right now, so it's my job to get it to you. Thank you all for giving me a wonderful birthday. All the birthday wishes were great. Thank you for being patient with me while I took most of the week off after that day just to take it easy. And mostly thank you for always supporting me all this time. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address provided in the description. But most importantly, please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.